I think at 41, I finally get what my dad's been telling me since I was a teenager, which is just have fun with it and treat it like a game. If you're investing in real estate and you haven't read books and you don't have a network and you're just flying blind, it can go really bad for you.
Things change and you have to pivot no matter what. So you have to find a strategy for learning from others on how to pivot, because sometimes it's hard to do it on your own.
I've been technically making mistakes in real estate since 2002. I could write 6 books about what not to do in real estate, that's for sure.
How important is having a community of people that are doing it?
Just having a community, it gives me a shortcut to understanding how things will play out. And you guys can save me of not having to make same mistakes that you've made.
All right, well, episode 44 of the Agent to Investor podcast, where we talk about the agent side of real estate investing. We talk about the successes, the failures, and all in between. My name is Nico Garcia, a local real estate agent and investor based out of Montgomery County, Maryland. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host.
I'm Anna Bilek, Northern Virginia realtor and mostly out-of-state investor. And we have another special guest today. He is from our RPM community with Coach Chet Carson. We've got Sean McKay with us. I was like, I don't have the whole list of all the amazing things you've done. I just know I hear you talk all the time about self-directed IRAs and other investing strategies that sound so smart. And I was like, we need to have Sean on here. I don't know what I'm going to ask him, but we need to have him on here.
Welcome to the show, Sean.
I appreciate it. It's always good to see you too. And the resume is not really that impressive. So that's why, we'll just kind of rock with it and see what you guys want to talk about.
Yeah, we'll take it from there. But before we go into specifics, and I know Anna mentioned the self-directed IRA, but we'd love to have a little bit of a background of where you're from and what initially got you into the real estate space.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was fortunate to watch some family members purchase a couple of rental properties as I was growing up. And I think that, coupled with the fact that I was the worst student ever, I literally graduated dead last in my high school class. I was like, oh, this is going to be a tough path. I need to figure out something different and entrepreneurial. Early on, I was fortunate to partner with some people and get into buying some rentals. So that's been a positive journey for my wife and I.
Okay. So you had family members that were already in real estate. Was it your parents, or was it extended family?
Yeah, I had some extended family. My dad bought a couple of rentals and I was like, oh, that's cool. It wasn't something that was done on any sort of scale. Okay. And I say this lovingly, it wasn't necessarily the most analytical journey of buying rentals. I think a lot of us kind of start and we're like, hey, if a bank will give us money, then we'll buy a rental property. And that was a little bit of it for us. And obviously you learn along the way. And thankfully I found Coach in 2008, started taking classes in 2010 from him. So that's been very useful for sure.
They didn't do anything to scare you off, because I know some people say their family did it, but they did very mom and pop type things. And they're like, I don't want to do that. That looks awful.
Yeah, exactly. It was definitely, there was lessons learned for sure from the beginning. I grew up in Florida, so very boom bust markets. We were talking earlier about how in 2008, the few properties that we owned just tanked in value. And so it definitely became clear we have to learn how to run numbers and actually understand cash flows and buying hopefully below value. So a lot of lessons learned. I could write 6 books about what not to do in real estate, that's for sure.
You kind of fail forward, right, Sean?
Absolutely.
So after high school, is that real estate exactly what you got into, or did you end up going another path, or?
It took a few years off after high school, knew I wasn't really mature enough to go to college. And frankly, there's probably 2 in the nation that would have taken me anyways. So it was painting houses outside in the Florida heat, working at grocery stores, stuff that I was like, oh, okay, life is a real thing. And I'm either going to be working jobs that are very physical in nature, or I'm going to need that education. I was fortunate to get into college and go through that process, got an economics degree. And I was actually very fortunate in that I knew somebody who owned a financial services company, a self-directed IRA company. And it was very early in the company. And thankfully, they took a chance on me and brought me on and started to learn about investing, learn about real estate, which is mostly what our client base was. So it was a great fit for me. I was fortunate.
And that was before you actually ended up investing, right? You ended up working with this firm and understanding the ins and outs with the business?
Unfortunately not. No, I had already made a number of really bad investments. And then I'm watching other real estate investors going, oh, that's how you're supposed to do it. And Chad was actually a client. And so I was like, oh, I need to hang out with this guy because he's got life and investing figured out far more than I do. So even though he's only a few years older, he kind of always been like the big brother that I wish I would have had. And maybe I'm the little brother he's thankful he didn't have, if that makes sense.
Let's talk to us about that first one. How did you find it and what did that look like? Was it there in Florida where you lived?
And what lesson did you learn?
Yeah, I would say the first handful of properties was read a book, talk to somebody, do any sort of due diligence on anything. It wasn't like put something under contract, see if you can get a bank loan. I would say for us, the real start of the journey was when we moved to North Carolina and we had just started taking classes from Chad and we moved to Charlotte. My wife and I had just gotten married and we bought a duplex and we lived on the small side, rented out the larger side. Obviously, as you guys know, the house hack strategy. And that was, as I think about our real start to the journey, where we were trying to be a lot more thoughtful with the approach and make it a real investment.
Oh, I have lots of questions because I'm like, wait, what? Because I was going to go back to the '08 thing because Brian's brother invested in Florida in '08 and he lost his shirt. Sorry, Kevin. Was that your family members that went through that trial and tribulation? Because I assume were you old enough at that point to buy a house?
Yeah. So the way that it would work typically would be I would contribute some of the down payment money. So I'm like hustling, doing some different manual labor jobs. And so I'd put up down payment. I was able to qualify and be on a few of the loans, but pretty quickly they, even pre-08, at some point were like, this guy has no credit. He's got zero net worth. He's throwing a little money in the deal, but he's not really useful in terms of the underwriting. So sometimes it was almost kind of like a silent partner. I would just put up half the down payment and we were all on the same page that I owned a percentage of it.
Okay. And I just brought that up because I know some people, and I, again, use my brother-in-law as an example. He's still very skittish about it. Like even what we're doing now, he's, oh, why are you doing that? So it's interesting that you went through that, but you came out the other side with the opposite mindset. You're like, okay, I learned something and I kept going and I got better at it as opposed to just not for me. I'm not doing it ever again.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Being honest, I think that for me, I realized that while I was very grateful to have the financial services job, I didn't think that it was going to be a great fit for me to have this very long career where I'd be working for 30, 40 years in a corporate setting. It never really felt like a fit for me. And so you're right. Like there was some real pain and it was scary and it was frustrating starting off, honestly, behind the eight ball when you looked at the negative net equity in Florida. But I think it was also a realization we hadn't done anything right on the front end, right? Like we hadn't found mentors. We hadn't learned how to really study real estate and do the work. And so I think it was, you're young and you're naive and you think, okay, if I just do it a lot better next time, hopefully we'll get better results, which it's not saying much, but we did end up getting better results as we took it more seriously.
So those initial properties, Sean, what type of strategy were you doing? And is that kind of similar to what you're doing now or?
Yeah. So early on, it was condos. So I grew up in this little sleepy beach town in Florida on the East Coast. It was just condos that were beachside, that were kind of entry-level properties. It's a tricky market down there because it's very much driven by the tourist industry. And so again, when something happens like an '08 or some really significant economic events in our country's history, that area tends to get hit disproportionately in a negative way. The goal was long-term rentals. You would see the infomercials. You'd see people like, I own an island and this, that, and the other thing. I thought, that's going to be amazing. I'll go from barely graduating high school to owning islands. This was going to be rad. And it probably happened for some people, but for us, it was long-term rentals, condos, and then sticking with that. But it was a lot of bad loan products, right? So it was things like adjustable rate mortgages. For one property we purchased, I had a distant family member that talked me into getting a negative amortizing loan, which some of your listeners may not be aware of that just deplorable product, but it's basically let's say you borrow $120,000 when you purchase the property. It's negative amortizing, meaning each year you actually end up owing more money on the property. So year two, you might owe $122,000 instead of $120,000. It just keeps going up and up the balance. The balance is going up, the value is going down. And that was horrendous. And we had to work on a lot of refinances and putting more cash into the deal over the years. And it ended up working out okay over a long enough time horizon. But again, a lot of lessons learned there.
A lot of lessons. And you also mentioned adjustable rate mortgages, ARMs. I think we spoke about this on the show before, but for those who don't know, can you explain what that is and why it's important to understand what type of loan products you have if you're an investor?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm certainly not a loan professional, but basically the products that we would get, you would lock in an interest rate for a short period of time, maybe a few years, and then the rate could adjust dramatically after that point in time. And you might be used to a principal, interest, taxes, and insurance payment of, say, $1,000 a month, and then the loan would reset and that $1,000 could turn into $1,600. And if you're renting the property for $1,100, that's not going to work out particularly well. So it's, again, there are probably investors that do well with it, but we ended up being more conservative and either trying to do seller financing deals since we moved to North Carolina, or when we had the corporate gig, 30-year fix, just very vanilla, in my view, safer loans there.
And can I ask one more question about that? You also mentioned, and we spoke about it off camera a little bit, about investing in Florida, and you worry about certain costs like the adjustable rate mortgages and things like that. But there's also insurance costs. There's principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and every market is a little bit different. So you might be talking about, for a new investor that's thinking of investing in a place like Florida, what they should be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. So at this time, late teens, early 20s, we would have these fun little events called hurricanes. And they were amazing if you wanted to party with your friends. And there were some really awesome elements to it as a young, kind of crazy kid. The downside was, as you said, Nico, that could really transform the costs associated with ownership. So I want to say it was around like 03, 04, 05, we had a number of hits through Central Florida. And so again, owning condos, that could dramatically affect the homeowners association dues because there's insurances wrapped up into things like that. So you could start with an HOA that was, let's say, $300, and that $300 could turn into $800 or $1,000 a month, which again, really blows up the cash flow. So I love Florida. I sometimes dream about going back and just raising the kids on the coast. But from a real estate standpoint, I think it can be a little bit trickier, and it certainly makes it a little bit more difficult to plan out your cash flows years down the road.
Yeah. That's why I think it's always important to have an area expert too, no matter where you are, because that's the kind of stuff that if you don't know the area well enough, because I'll say it's not just Florida, like we have a coastal property in North Carolina and our insurance like doubled last year. We didn't have any claims, but around us there was flooding and all kinds of other stuff. And so it's good to, or at least have that in mind, like wherever it is that you're going to invest. If it's a state that gets hit by natural disasters, insurance is a big deal. And insurance carriers, a lot of them are pulling out of some of these states.
That's a good point. Absolutely. Yeah.
So Sean, you mentioned that like those beginning stages, you were just fumbling and learning as you go. And then you ended up meeting with Coach Carson. And how important is like having a coach, having a mentor, having a community of people that are doing it? How did it build for you to where you're at now?
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, Chad as an individual has just been so important to us. Everything from helping us build our buy box when we moved to Charlotte and understanding a part of town and a strategy that would make sense based on, you know, the skill sets that we had and the deficits that we had as well, because we all have kind of some pros and cons on our balance sheet. And so it was great to have somebody who was further along in the journey, had made their own mistakes and could speak to, okay, I know that sounds like a good idea, but let me give you some shortcuts and help you to hopefully make fewer mistakes in the future. So that's been amazing. I think also, as you said, just having a community where you can workshop different ideas with different investors who have had different experiences, right? So you guys have had experiences that I haven't had. And so as I get input from you, it gives me a shortcut to understanding how things will play out. And you guys can save me 5, 10, 15 years of heartache of not having to make the same mistakes that maybe you've made. So I think having that collective group where you can share and also just cheer each other on, right? There's tough days at the office, right? As much as you can read books and You can have your community, you're going to have tenants that might tear a property up. You could have a loan that's just dragging on that you just can't get to closing, and all the things that I'm sure you guys deal with as well.
Yeah. That's one of the benefits of our community, but all the communities, your local RIAs, I know Anna and I host our local meetups, but learning from, like you said, Sean, learning from other people's experiences, what's working, what isn't working. And that's really been helpful for me these last 2 years, is just talking to people, interviewing people, and just talking about the real estate investing business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what's also understated too is every conversation that we have with any level of experience, you get so much value, right? So I've been technically making mistakes in real estate since 2002, right? So that's like a long time horizon for someone who's 41, but I can speak to someone who just bought their first rental last month, and they have a take that I would have never thought about in terms of how to think about an area that might be up and coming or something like that. I'm like, oh, that is like super solid. And I think sometimes we can make mistakes as investors where we think, oh, I've been investing longer than someone, or I have more properties than someone. I think there's just tremendous value to be had from everybody.
Yeah. Get a fresh take and a fresh perspective on things that you wouldn't otherwise have. Because we do tend to get stuck in our ways. Like, regardless of how old you are, once you learn how to do something, you get comfortable doing it the same way over and over again. But as we've seen over the last several years, even the last few months, you have to pivot. Things change and you have to pivot no matter what. So you have to find a strategy for learning from others on how to pivot, because sometimes it's hard to do it on your own.
100%. Yeah, there's probably been like, since 2010, there's probably been like 6 times where I'll be calling Chad, like, the market's changed. What do I do? I can't buy the deals I've been buying for the last 12 months. Help. So and sometimes it's like obvious stuff too. It's like the most obvious pivots that if I call you guys up next week and I'm like, I got this super challenging problem, you're like, yeah, all you got to do is X. I'm like, yeah, no, that's correct. Okay, thank you for that. Sometimes you need that outside resource to just give you some common sense.
Yeah. And I mean, other investors do stuff that you've just never done. I was speaking to one person and somehow we were talking about putting mortgages or doing a portfolio loan on your portfolio, like list of properties. And they're like, oh, I was talking to Sean about that. And then like he brought you in and started talking about getting like a second, like a HELOC or another loan on an investment property. And we're like, we've never done that. So it's also that, like, it's just strategies. We don't know what we don't know, but you've done it. And it's like novel to us because we've never attempted it before. And having someone in the group that we know we can go to in the future and be like, hey, what was that strategy again? We want to try it. Can you walk us through it? That is invaluable.
Yeah, I love it. And we look at it and we say, for many of us, I think Chad is some sort of a mentor. And I love the fact that Chad's so open about sharing mentors that he has and continues to learn from as well. So it's like we get these generations of experiences where when you stack it up, we can pull from hundreds of years of life experience, of investing experience. And that's great, especially when you started off on the other end of the spectrum where it's like, nope, don't need to read, don't need to talk to anybody. Jeff at SunTrust said he could get me a loan. We're rocking it. We're going to buy that island next month. Let's go. You know what I mean? Yeah. You get real humbled and you're like, can anyone talk to me? Can somebody just let me know if this makes any sense whatsoever?
Yeah, there's a ton of experience out there, right? We don't have to reinvent the wheel, as they say. So I wanted to actually talk to you. Our mentor, Coach Carson, talks about phases in a real estate investor's journey, right? There's the beginner phase, the starter phase where you don't have any properties. You're looking to get that first one, which is 0 to 1 is always one of the hardest steps. And then there's the builder phase where we're looking to build to get to that financial freedom. And then there's the ender phase. And I know you spoke about this at the retreat about maybe pruning the portfolio and things like that. But you mind talking about the ender phase? And then this is going to cue us up to the self-directed IRA and how that goes. But you mind talking about the different phases as a real estate investor?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you said it well, Nico, where we're either in the starter, the builder, the ender phase. And I think it can be very different for different investors and different just people. As we look at our community, there's some people that feel like their ender phase where they can leave their day job encompasses making like 30 grand a month from their investments. And that's great. That's on the higher end of at least our group and our community. And there are others that once I get to 4 grand a month, I'm great. I'm going to leave the day job and then I'm financially free. based on my investment income. And I think we all have these conversations in the community about there's certainly no right answer. There's certainly no wrong answer. I think as long as you just sit down with your immediate family and just take stock of what you want your life to look like. I think Emily had one of the best takes at our retreat when she was talking about how she's given up on this idea of planning like 20 years out into the future. And she really thinks about shorter time increments because none of us really know what 10 years is necessarily going to look like. We don't know if we're going to live in the same place. God forbid there's health issues in our family, or who knows what's going to happen. And so that really resonated. And I thought I think that's a great way to think about it because I was so stressed for years before I left my corporate job about what's the exact number we need to get to so that we feel like we can, quote unquote, live off of our investment income. And I anguished over it and probably annoyed Chad and other people way too much about, are we $1,200 away from it? Are we $2,000? And I think a lot of it is just like most things, like when we get into investing, you got to take a little bit of a leap of faith where you understand your baseline numbers. You also understand the world can change. And I think for most of us, we're probably not going to want to just sit on the couch and eat Cheetos. Yeah. So it's not like we're never going to make any source of income ever. You guys are prolific with all the different streams of income that you have from active to more passive income. And I think that kind of happens for most of us as well. That's a super weird, long answer to your question there, but sorry.
Well, great answer. Because like you said, it is different for everybody. And I want to talk specifically about the ender phase. And this is where I know Coach described it as work is optional and you're living essentially passively through your investments. And in our case, we're talking about real estate investing. You're living passively through your properties. But one specific way and I know you have some experience working in this field, is the self-directed IRA. And for those audience who don't know what that is, you mind explaining what that is and how it could be a great tool for investing?
Yeah, absolutely. Most people are familiar with IRAs and as a baseline concept. And typically we think of that as a vehicle to invest in the stock market. And so what's important to understand is that with a retirement account, the way the IRS code is written is it actually just simply tells us what we cannot invest in. And so it's essentially life insurance policies and collectibles. So you can extrapolate, there's so many things that we can do if that's the list of things that we cannot do. And so the equities markets, the advisors, the banking institutions, the deal in bank products and the equities market, like the stock market, they've done a great job of educating the public on that avenue to invest. And so as a small sect of the overall financial services world, I worked in what they considered the self-directed space. It was really just a marketing term to try to differentiate away from, we're talking about the stock market. So largely our clients invested in what you would consider alternative assets. So it would be directly owning real estate with a retirement account. It could be being a lender, a private hard money lender, however you want to think about that, with your retirement account dollars. It could be investing in a privately held company. So instead of investing in Exxon, maybe your friend is starting a tech company, or it could be a landscaping company. It doesn't have to be any sort of form or format. So you got to see a lot of really cool, interesting things. And what we focused on, because of my love and passion for real estate, was I would focus on real estate entrepreneurs as our kind of primary client base. And so that was fun, again, to learn and share ideas with them.
What would you say, Sean, is like a self-directed IRA gives you as the individual more freedom of where your investments go, right? What would you say are some of the pros and some of the cons of that? Because I'm sure they're both avenues, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So to me, the pros, someone would hear me do a talk somewhere and they'd say, that sounds great, but what are the issues? And the issues are, if you're investing in real estate like me at 18 years old and you haven't read books and you don't have a network and you're just flying blind, it can go really bad for you in any asset class, right? So it could go bad for you in the stock market. It can go bad for you in real estate, private equity, like all those sorts of things can go bad if you're not knowledgeable and you don't surround yourself with a network and a team to help you really understand your investments. I think the flip side of that is obviously people like yourself that are really knowledgeable about a certain asset class. I think it can make sense in a lot of situations to also use those 401ks, those IRAs, to invest in real estate in some format, whether that's through lending, through direct ownership. So it can be a great tool versus my neighbor just made a ton of money in XYZ startup. So what the heck, I'll throw it into that. To me, the stock market isn't inherently a bad vehicle. I think a lot of people bash it, especially in the real estate space. But I think when you look at the people that perform poorly in that or any other asset class, again, it's really just coming from a place of lack of due diligence, lack of really doing the work and the research. And so it's not that the stock market's awful. You're just probably an awful investor in public equities. And that's largely been the case for me. Just try to stick with your level of expertise. I think it's a challenging time in the self-directed space. It's a stunningly underregulated industry. So when people think about financial services, they think about just the miles of audits that these banks have to go through and financial advisors to keep their licensing and all this kind of stuff. Because the self-directed industry is a relatively small piece of the financial services pie, and because the assets are a little bit more difficult for auditors to understand, that area has been one in which there's not nearly as many regulatory eyeballs on it as there should be. So the last couple of years, there's been a number of firms that have gone out of business. There's been some very poor decisions made around cash management and liquidity ratios. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds and bore everybody, but I would say the biggest red flag perhaps with a self-directed account is that they're privately held companies. And so we don't get access to the financials for these self-directed companies. And because we don't have access to that, we don't really have an understanding of their systems, of their policies and procedures, and ultimately what they're doing with our cash. The main government body that rules over self-directed firms are the state banking commissions. And I had a senior position with my self-directed firm, and it was shocking how unsophisticated they were about understanding our business and how to really underwrite and understand how healthy a self-directed firm actually is. I guess what I'm saying is that you got to be really careful the firms that you work with. And again, that's very difficult to underwrite because we don't have a lot of inside knowledge as to how they're set up. So it can be a great tool, but it's yeah.
Get with somebody who knows what they're doing, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's a whole different perspective. That's like from the 1,000-foot view. I don't have that view. We learned about self-directed IRAs at the Bigger Pockets conference because I had a W-2 job. I was a government employee. So I had TSP and a 401k. And most corporations set it up that way. They have deals with Berkshire Hathaway or with Charles Schwab. And they if you want a 401k, just put it over here and they manage it. So I will say from my perspective, as someone that has a self-directed IRA, the pros and cons that I think I realized from a user level is like a pro is, like you said, you can use it to be a private money lender. You can use it to buy real estate projects. There are rules and regulations as to who you can do it with, and you can't do it with someone that's directly going to benefit from it. So there are rules. So I guess that's the con. There you have to understand the rules of who you can lend to and who you cannot lend to. You get a lot more control over it because you decide where it goes, but it's a lot more work because you're the one controlling where it goes in a lot of cases. And I guess the other con is as profits do come in, like I took one of my 401ks, converted it into a self-directed, and we invested in a syndication. I cannot touch any of that money until I become a certain age. So this isn't, oh, wow, I hit a really great investment deal. I have all this cash coming in. You can't tap into it personally until your retirement age, which I guess is maybe another con if you're not anywhere close to retirement age. Over that, is that all correct?
Yeah, 100%. It's so regardless of whether it's self-directed or not, you're most of the time going to want to wait until you're at least 59 and a half years old to pull money from it. Yeah, I would agree with you. I would do talks as the representative for a self-directed company. And people would say, what are you doing? And I would tell them, I would say, listen, 95% of my wealth is outside of my retirement account. And my rationale was I wanted to be in a position where if I decided corporate America wasn't the right fit, which we ended up doing, we had cash flow, we had net worth outside of our retirement account. I'm not saying this is right for anybody else, but if we're playing the game where all of our assets, all of our net worth, all of our cash flow is inside the retirement accounts, and we're doing these great real estate deals and we accumulate cash flow, et cetera, that's all well and good as long as we're willing to wait till 59 and a half. Yeah, absolutely. I think you nailed it, Anna.
Yeah, I think people are taught to put it in, because that's what most people do, right? They put it in a 401k, never to be touched again. And most of their wealth is sitting in a TFP or a 401k account. And some of that is lack of education, mostly lack of education, because it's a set it and forget it. Like you send it off and some broker is deciding where it goes and how it's getting divided up. And you don't have to see it again unless you look at the stock market every day. But it's a very much set it and forget it. But I think most Americans that work W-2 jobs, that's where all their wealth is.
Yeah. But so I think one thing that I do want to point out is that when we look at that, because you're absolutely right, Anna, like statistically, the average American, it's maybe a primary residence, and then it's a retirement account. That's the net worth. And we look at why that's the case. The reason that's the case is because every Super Bowl ad, every commercial, every ad we see on different forums on the internet, it's coming from financial services companies who have a strongly vested interest in all of the money being in a retirement account. So the next question becomes, why do they want it in a retirement account? Because they could also invest our personal funds, right? It could be outside a retirement account. They can manage accounts for us, put us in mutual funds, et cetera. What they realized many decades ago was if the money is locked up in a retirement account, you're far less likely to want to take a tax hit, maybe take penalties for taking that money out, because that's just going to destroy your wealth, right? So once it's in the retirement account, it's effectively trapped during your working decades. And so that's one thing that I wish we could put Super Bowl ads out about that is, hey, there's different ways to think about your finances and about creating wealth. It doesn't have to be that bucket. If you love your job and you're going to be cruising until 60, great. That's fantastic. But I think some of us would like to have some optionality and be able to pivot in our 30s, 40s, and 50s before we get there.
Yeah, the self-directed IRA. Now, as I was saying that my joke about the stock market yesterday, it also gives you the opportunity to diversify risk, because if all of your 401k is in the stock market, you may be a little screwed right now. But if you had a self-directed IRA, it doesn't all have to be in stock. You can put it in real estate, and those tend to not go in tandem down at the same time. So it's also a way to diversify risk.
Yeah,
100%.
I'd like to ask a specific question. I think both of you guys actually touched about it. Is one of the benefits is private money lending and real estate with your self-directed IRA. You mind explaining how that would work, Sean? Who could benefit from it? Both parties.
Yeah. So I think there's different investors that might consider private lending inside of a retirement account. So there are some people that we all know who are interested in real estate, but maybe they don't have the time or the energy or the interest in digging in and doing the work that you guys do to be experts in real estate. And so they like to be involved in real estate, but they just don't have the tools or the confidence, whatever it may be. And so them lending their money to someone like one of you for a deal is going to be a way that they can participate in real estate, to Anna's point, some diversification in their portfolio, but do it in a very passive way. So mechanically, they would first find a self-directed company that they were comfortable with, and they'd open that account. They'd then work on moving over whatever portion of the old 401k or employer-sponsored plan. Anna mentioned TSPs, thrift savings plans, 403bs, anything that a company is set up for you or a government agency. And then the third phase is to work on the paperwork. And in this case, work with the closing attorneys to get all the documentation in order so that your retirement account actually is a note holder. So it is the bank that is lending money to that real estate entrepreneur so that they can do that deal. So that's the first group, the really passive group. Maybe that's a longer term loan, perhaps. Set it and forget it. The entrepreneur's got a longer runway. They don't have to keep churning their money on different deals. And then you see some that are interested in maybe getting a little bit higher interest rate. And so they're willing to constantly be working on different deals and sourcing opportunities with real estate entrepreneurs. And maybe they're interested in getting a little bit higher interest rate. Maybe there's points involved, et cetera. And so there's a lot of different flavors, as you guys know, to how to lend, whether it's inside or outside of a retirement account.
And the benefit for somebody that, for example, like me, I do fix and flips. I can get access to money from somebody that wants to passively invest, and they can get a little bit more than what they would essentially get in the stock market. So they're open to doing that. Now, obviously, as the lender, as your self-directed owner, you want to vet whoever you're lending money to. Sean, and I know you actively do this as well. So I'm just curious to what type of deals you would be looking at, or the type of people you'd be looking at to actually be lending out money to.
Yeah, I would say the biggest lesson I've learned on the lending side is first and foremost to try to understand and educate yourself on the deal itself. So to me, that's the actual collateral, whether it's raw land, whether it's a house, whatever it may be there, and try and understand the numbers and the safety in that deal. And as a private lender, you understand there's basically two outcomes. Either you're going to get paid as you're supposed to get paid on the deal, and if there's monthly payments, those get made. Hopefully that entrepreneur exits the property, whether it's via refinance or selling the property, paying you off, whatever it may be. And so, that kind of goes according to plan. But if for whatever reason it doesn't go according to plan, as the lender, assuming your paperwork is good, the other outcome is you might actually end up owning that property. And so you really want to make sure that there's a margin of safety there. So if the property is worth $200,000, you guys are in more expensive markets, let's say $400,000, and you're lending, $400,000 against that $400,000 asset, I would submit that's maybe not the safest loan that you could make, even if the interest you're being promised is way above average. Personally, and we all get to make this decision, I would personally rather lend, let's say, $300,000 against a $400,000 house, but maybe make a little bit less interest, because my hope is that I'm safe, that everyone can make money on this deal, and we can move forward and it's profitable for everybody.
Okay. All right. I may have missed this earlier because I'm not gonna lie, I decided it was a good idea to film outside and a spider just crawled across. So if you saw me jump earlier. So my question, and I might have missed it. So what is so we talked about phases. I think if I heard you correctly, when I jumped on this recording, maybe you're heading towards the ender phase. What phase are you in right now? And what does your current portfolio look like? And what do you need to get to that ender phase finally? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. We are fortunate. When I left the corporate job in 2023, we were at the harvester phase. And so initially our thought was that we would just cruise with our rental portfolio. And I think what we've realized was, to the point that you guys have made today, some diversification can be helpful. Specifically in North Carolina, we've had some weird events. So we had a crazy flood situation in Western North Carolina that did a lot of damage and created a lot of havoc for people personally, financially, et cetera. And then actually a few weeks ago or last week, there were a lot of fires also in Western North Carolina that, again, created some issues. And so I started to think about our entire net worth and our entire cash flow being predicated on assets that we own in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we live and invest. And so long story short, little by little, we have sold off some additional properties. So we got up to 21 doors. And at 21 doors, it was one of those, hey, Chad, what do I do now? We're like halfway to where we want to be cash flow wise. In his very Chad way, after 2 seconds of thinking, he's like, probably want to sell some of your properties that you don't love. Oh, okay, great. I've been working on this for 3 months and that took you 3 seconds. Sweet. We did that over the next couple of years. We methodically sold off, like starting with our least desirable properties. And so we got down to, I want to say maybe like 13 doors. And then my wife had left when we had kids. She left her job. And then at that point, I left my corporate gig in 2023. Since then, we sold off another few properties. I think we have 8 properties left. And so we've taken some of that additional capital and we use that to lend just in an LLC. So that's not through a retirement account. So we have like rental properties and then we do some private lending as our investment income.
Now, when you sold some of these properties, did you use it to pay off any of the existing loans that you have currently?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we're simple. We're very vanilla, nothing super crazy on our end, very low burn rate.
Yeah, as Coach calls it, print in the portfolio.
That's right.
Cool.
Yeah, because a lot of people think about growing it bigger and bigger, but if you sell off the ones you don't love and pay off or pay down the mortgage on the ones you do love, you get more cash flow if you pay it off because you don't have a mortgage to pay anymore. So I assume your cash flow is at least comparable to what it was when you had more doors because you paid down some of those ones that you loved. Is that an accurate statement?
We have more cash flow at 8 than we did at 21.
Yeah.
Okay, so proof right there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great point. I think the other thing that I never really understood until the end of that builder journey was the other problem that I was having, maybe some others have too, is when you go through market cycles, you make mistakes, you have big rehabs, you have tenants tear up properties, you have COVID, where maybe tenants aren't paying, like all the things that can happen to us as real estate entrepreneurs. What I started to get really frustrated with was I felt like we almost couldn't keep enough cash around to deal with what in context is still not a crazy big portfolio. We all know people with much bigger portfolios than we had, but it just never felt like we were safe and we were like bulletproof in terms of needing cash for, let's say, 10 HVACs go out next year, whatever it may be. So I think the other benefit that we've received from that really small and mighty portfolio, as Coach would call it, is this idea of, because there's fewer variables, if you will, we're able to utilize more of our cash on the sidelines to do things like make private loans or play offense, if you will.
So cool. And Sean, we are running close on time. So we want to ask a few final questions. You've been in the business for quite a bit and you learned a ton, but what is some advice you would give a younger Sean off of what you know now based on your journey?
Find Chad earlier. Yeah, I would say get involved with my local investment group. I would read books a lot earlier. And I would also understand too that by trying to go fast, you're going to do it in a much more risky way and you're actually going to take a lot longer to get there. And so I think that's what a lot of us are working on as well, as trying to just be maybe a little bit slower than we want to be with the journey and make investments, take a moment to see how they play out, if we want to do more of those investments or if we have to pivot to other strategies. So just try not to be in a hurry, you knucklehead, I think is what I would say to the younger Sean.
What would you say is some of the best advice that you ever received, or what was some of the worst advice you received in your time of business?
I would say probably a couple pieces would be, I think at 41, I finally get what my dad's been telling me since I was a teenager, which is just have fun with it and treat it like a game. Don't make everything so intense and like it's the end of the world. Like most things will work out as long as your family's happy and healthy. Life is good. I would say strategically, I really appreciate the specific guidance that Chad gave us to prune our portfolio as opposed to trying to grow to create additional cash flow. That saved us a lot of time in corporate America and a lot of just angst and stress. So those were great. Conversely, the feedback that I'm actually happy we didn't take was as we were starting to accumulate some units, some of the old-time investors were telling us we need to start 1031ing into apartment complexes and buying 30, 50 unit buildings. And that's cool for people that are really interested in kind of that larger scale game. But even at that time, that never really resonated and felt interesting. So I'm grateful that we decided to stay with smaller houses, duplexes, triplexes, stuff like that.
Yeah, I love that. It really comes down to your overall strategy and what you want, right? Your goal might be to get the X and then somebody else's goal is going to tell you to keep going. So really, I love that advice. So I see behind you, you have the small and mighty investor, and we And I really love that book. But is there any other books or that you would recommend for our audience?
Excuse me. So yeah, for me on the real estate end, I think that is what I love about that book is whether you're trying to buy your first deal or you've been investing for decades, I think that there's a lot of value you can get. As you guys know, I think Chad just does such a great job of framing situations and how to think about investing and really tying life into it. That's a book that I've read 4 or 5 times and I'll continue to come back to. I guess to plug in another one, John Shaw, Building Wealth One House at a Time, is also a phenomenal read. Same kind of vibe to it where it's not about here's how you can scale and buy 100 houses this year or something like that. It's just practical and how to slowly build out a high quality portfolio.
Yeah. I think that's what really attracted Anna and I to that community is we all kind of have that same mindset. We don't want to have these, I don't want to speak for Anna, but having that 100 unit building complex, that's not super attractive. I love the idea of having a small portfolio that's going to sustain our lifestyle, which is what brought us all here today. And we appreciate you coming on, Sean. But our last question is we always want to ask, how can, Anna and I, our audience, help benefit you? Is there anything that you're looking for, anything you need help with in these upcoming months?
Yeah. So I would say selfishly, if you guys could just keep doing content, I love what you guys are doing. And it's just fun, again, hearing different perspectives from people that have lived different lives. So I really appreciate and respect that you guys continue to do it because it's not easy to create content on a regular basis. I'd say also just as someone who is a participant in rental property mastery, you guys have been phenomenal helping us spread the word about this community. And as you guys know, as we're able to add people to it, it just heightens the value that all of us get with different experiences and ways of thinking about investing. I guess basically just keep being you guys. You're doing awesome. I really appreciate you.
Awesome, Sean. If somebody has any additional questions, where can they reach out to you? Do you have any social medias that
Barely. Yeah, you could probably find me if you search on Facebook, Sean McKay. Honestly, I feel like I just spend all my time in the RPM community. As you guys know, that's like its own social media platform. Yeah. And I'm not really a social media guy. So it's like all that I have to give to the world of the internet is in RPM. Hopefully people want to come and hang out with all of us in RPM and just share ideas. There you go. If you need any questions or want to talk to Sean, you have to join RPM. I don't think anyone's going to want to, but yeah, appreciate it. That's going to do it for another episode of the Agent to Investor podcast. Thank you again. If you found any value, please share, subscribe. You can reach out to me directly at Nico Garcia or N Garcia Official on all social platforms. Until the next one.